video, we will be discussing the history of special education, including the laws that got us to where we are today, the process and the procedures that it takes in order to identify, assess, and then place a child within special education, and lastly, the parental rights that are involved with special education. First, we are going to go back and discuss the early beliefs for students with disabilities. Dating all the way back to the Spartans, the parents were forced to abandon babies that were considered imperfect. There were some instances in early history where people had a more positive view of people who were different. Dating back to Hippocrates and Plato, who lived around 400 BC, supported people with disabilities, often defending them. Alexander the Great built temples which provided asylum for mentally ill people. By the late 1700s, Jean-Marc Gaspard Itard sought out new ways to teach those with mental challenges. He did this by working with a boy he found without an upbringing. He was able to produce behavior changes in the boy, but was unable to teach him to talk or to independently survive, so he felt like a failure. However, many others followed his methods. The first American residential school for the deaf was established in 1817 at Hartford, Connecticut, by Thomas Hopkins Gallaudet. Following suit, the Perkins School for the Blind was founded in Watertown, Massachusetts, and was the first school for the blind. This was a school where Anne Sullivan came to teach Helen Keller. After this time, schools began opening to train teachers to work with mentally challenged students. Until the 1960s, there was no real legislation for people with disabilities. In the beginning phases, parents formed advocacy groups, and in 1971, the Pennsylvania Association for Retarded Children won a landmark case against the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania based on the 14th Amendment. The Vocational Rehabilitation Act of 1973, Section 504, required that no otherwise qualified handicapped individual in the United States shall, solely by reason of his handicap, be excluded from the participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination. All recipients of Department of Education funds have the opportunity for a free, appropriate public education, or FAPE. A student who qualifies under Section 504 should be provided resources through regular education. Spinning off the Vocational Rehabilitation Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, of 1990 became more comprehensive. This act defines discrimination and makes child care centers part of public accommodations. Then, this went to the Education for All Handicapped Children Act of 1975. This stated that all children between 3 and 18 must be provided a free, public, appropriate education, better known as FAPE. Lastly, the Individuals with Disabilities Act, or IDEA, took over with making sure all children with disabilities must receive an education. Lastly, the most recent update to IDEA, known as the Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act, created new regulations that included procedural requirements, legally correct IEP meetings, developing a meaningful IEP, conducting relevant assessments, linking goals and services to assessments, and developing measurable goals. The new IDEIA holds schools more accountable than ever to creating and providing a public education that is individualized for each student. As a parent, you have lots of rights with your student. As we talk about the evaluation process, you always have a choice in every piece of it. This includes the parent handbook that you see here. This will be given to you by your special education teacher. A few of the most important rights that parents have include notification when evaluation, identification, and educational placement are done initially or are changed. Parents have the right to inspect and review all records used to identify, evaluate, and place their child. Parental consent is required before any child can initially be evaluated, as well as parents can get different educational evaluations done. Parents can challenge or appeal any decisions made. This booklet is not intended as a full explanation of your legal rights and responsibilities under the state and federal special education laws, but if you have any further questions, be sure to contact your special education provider. There are 13 categories that we recognize that students can fall within. Each of them carries their own requirements for testing and being included under said category. These 13 categories include deaf blindness, cognitive disability, emotional disturbance, hearing loss, specific learning disability, multiple disabilities, orthopedic impairment, vision loss, deafness, speech and language impairment, other health impairment, autism spectrum disorder, traumatic brain injury, and then the category for children under 5 is developmental delay. Deaf blindness is marked by the co-occurrence of hearing and visual impairments, which causes severe communication needs that cannot be accommodated in the normal special education programs that are solely meant for children with blindness or deafness. The following assessments need to be done to qualify under this category: optometric, audiological, ability, academic achievement, language, adaptive behavior, a Braille assessment, which is only done with age-appropriate children, orientation, and mobility. The next one we will talk about is emotional disturbance. This can come from multiple characteristics, but it must happen over a long period of time. That's the most important piece of this. So a student may be identified if they show serious behavior problems that last at least 6 months or longer with documentation, a performance of 2 standard deviations or more below the mean in emotional functioning, and an adverse effect on academic performance is shown on evaluations. So the evaluations that will be done to be qualified within this category include ability, academic achievement, observations, and behavior. A cognitive disability is significantly below average general functioning of 2 standard deviations or below, which occur simultaneously with deficits in adaptive behavior. These deficits must include taking care of yourself, maintaining emotions, those major executive functioning skills, and things like that. So the assessments used to evaluate for cognitive disability is ability, academic achievement, and adaptive behavior. Hearing loss is a category utilized for unaided hearing loss of 35 to 69 decibels that makes the acquisition of receptive and expressive language skills difficult without amplification. The assessments used to evaluate hearing loss include audiological, ability, academic achievement, and language. Specific learning disability covers a broad range of areas that involve understanding or using spoken language as well as written language that manifest from the imperfect ability to listen, think, speak, read, write, spell, or do any sort of mathematical calculations. The categories where these deficits must be shown include oral expression, listening comprehension, written expression, basic reading skills, reading fluency skills, reading comprehension, mathematics calculation, and mathematics problem solving. So students must meet a discrepancy between their IQ and their scores in each of those areas administered in order to qualify. These do not apply to disabilities that are a result of hearing, visual, or motor disabilities. So the assessments used for specific learning disability include ability, academic achievement, and observation. Under multiple disabilities, students must just have simultaneous impairments that create severe educational needs. So the evaluations must be done in at least 2 or more disability categories that we are discussing now, and the student must meet those criteria within those categories. Orthopedic impairments include severe impairments that adversely affect students' educational performance, including impairments from congenital anomaly, impairments caused by disease, and impairments caused from other things like cerebral palsy or amputations. There must be evidence of impaired motor functioning, deficits in muscular functioning, problems that affect gross or fine motor skills, and there's a medical report of the impairment. Other assessments done for evaluation include ability, academic achievement, gross and or fine motor, adaptive behavior, current medical data from qualified medical examiner, and documentation including observation of classroom performance and evaluation of how the orthopedic impairments adversely affect the educational performance in the general education classroom for that student. Vision loss includes blindness and is an impairment of vision that, even with correction, would adversely affect the student's educational performance. So the evaluations will include ophthalmological or optometric, ability, academic achievement, adaptive behavior, and Braille assessment. Deafness includes hearing loss that is so severe. A speech or language impairment is a communication disorder that adversely affects the student's academic performance. To meet this category, a student must perform 2 standard deviations below the mean, and intelligibility is affected in conversation. Performance on phonological assessment falls in the profound or severe range, or an error persists 6 months to a year longer than the chronological age of the child allows. The assessments to be diagnosed include articulation, fluency, voice, and language, and these assessments must be done by a certified speech-language pathologist. Other health impairment includes an umbrella of disabilities that can include limited strength, vitality, or alertness, including a heightened alertness to environmental stimuli that results in limited alertness with respect to the educational environment. Adverse effects to the educational performance must be shown. Evaluations performed to qualify in this disability include ability, academic achievement, and/or documentation of a chronic or acute health problem. This is a category that we see students with ADHD and ADD get diagnosed under, as long as they have the medical diagnosis of that, and students show that they need that support in order to perform. This is where they get qualified under most often. Autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, is a developmental disability that significantly affects verbal and nonverbal communication and social interaction and results in adverse effects of the child's educational performance. Students must meet the criteria for specific categories in order to be qualified in the category, as well as evaluations in the following areas, including ability, academic achievement, language, adaptive behavior to include social skills, behavior, the Autism Spectrum Disorder Instrument, and an observation. The true ASD-specific instrument that they're discussing is often only done in specialized settings in South Dakota, such as LifeScape. Oftentimes, teachers are not able to give this assessment on their own, so they go out to other sources in order to get them tested. Traumatic brain injury is an acquired injury to the brain caused by external physical force, resulting in a total or partial functional disability or psychosocial impairment, or both, that adversely affects the student's educational performance. The following evaluations are done to test, including ability, medical records of documentation of brain injury, academic achievement, and an adaptive behavior to include social skills. And lastly, not part of the 13 categories, but one we discuss, is the developmental delay. This is a category for the 3, 4, and 5-year-olds who show severe delays and qualify as a major disability category above, but are not able to qualify that until they are 6. We are now going to be discussing the assessment process. One of the things I wanted to show you is where all this information can be found on the South Dakota Department of Education. So the website here is just doe.sd.gov. And if you go down to parents, you'll find that number 5 is special education. So if we just select this option, it's going to bring you to a screen that brings up a couple of different choices. So here you'll find assessment and evidence-based practices. So this is some more information about the supports and the Smarter Balance assessments. Some of the collaboration, the financial and data collection, the professional learning, which is more for educators, and lastly, the special education process and forms. This is the best place for parents to go. Now, if you're looking for the documents that actually will go into your IEP, we will select Individual Education Program Process Documents. Down here is also your parental rights, which we will look at later. So if we go down, you'll see some eligibility guides up here, which is what we use to determine eligibility for students, as well as some IEP technical assistance, which your special education teacher will utilize. Otherwise, though, we see the individual education plan, which we will go through in a later video, as well as all of these documents here, which we are going to go through quickly. The first document that you will get sent home is probably this parental prior written notice and consent for evaluation. And that document will look like this. So same information as the IEP, which we'll discuss later. It's just telling you what the purpose is, whether it's an initial evaluation or a 3-year, as well as these options down below. Then there will be documented parent input. This may come at a later date, just because obviously we are just asking most of the time for the ability to check your student, and then we'll get that documented input at a later time. These are the assessments that your child will go through. So as we discussed with the disability categories, what assessments each child needs, this is where we will check those assessments. Then these are any other areas that may need to be evaluated, especially if we're talking about blindness or deafness, or anything with developmental delay. We might work on this too. These are the tests that will be administered, so we'll write those tests here. And then these questions are just explaining why the district is getting consent to evaluate, or whatever they're trying to do here. This is a description of what the team tried to do. So this would be if your school is an RTI or